Jennifer's going to read the scripture for us.
Matthew 5. When he saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to teach them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the humble, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. You are blessed when they insult you and persecute you and falsely say every kind of evil against you because of me. Be glad and rejoice, because your reward is great in heaven. For that is how they persecuted the prophets who were before you. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Writing has always come rather naturally to me. I've never really enjoyed subjects that have definitive right and wrong answers, those ones that come with step-by-step instructions and equations, because I still somehow inevitably land at the wrong one, and there's no defense. There's just a red X, and you got that one wrong, on to the next one. But those subjects that involve sitting down and reading and compiling thoughts, then drawing and defending arguments, generally speaking, you can say almost whatever you want to say so long as you can rationally and reasonably argue your point out. And I've always had a knack for that, generally speaking. So when I was in college and seminary, I would always look into, does this professor do final exams or final papers? Because to this day, final exams are my nightmare. I don't want a multiple choice exam by any means. I just want to write a paper. And I know that's not everyone's forte, but I found that writing papers, I generally did better in grades than any sort of final exam where professors would definitively say, no, you're wrong here. And that worked out for me most of my college and seminary career. That was until New Testament 1. I signed up with a professor, Dr. Michael Peach, who almost exclusively gave papers and papers alone, and signed up to write my seminal paper of the class over the Beatitudes, a paper that I called Steps to Happiness. And I wrote what I thought was a pretty well articulated, compelling argument, complete with like a graphic and everything within the paper, in which I portrayed the Beatitudes as some sort of moral stepladder where you work your way to deeper happiness by walking from one step to the next. So in sorts, you start off recognizing how poor in spirit you are. When you recognize how poor in spirit you are, that makes you mourn. And as you're mourning, that's going to drop your arrogance level a little bit and lead to some humility in your life, and so on and so forth, until you arrive at the pinnacle of happiness, which is persecution. In my mind, it made sense some 10 years ago, but everything seemed to flow nicely, so I submitted the paper and didn't think about it until I got my grade back. And to this day, it is the lowest grade on a paper I have ever made. I won't give you the grade, I'll just let you know it was not passing. But what stung even more than the grade was the professor's comment. Seminary professors have this way of perfecting the artistry of Christian tact coupled with brutal comments. So he struck up the paper all the way through, then at the bottom signed it. The Beatitudes are notoriously difficult to interpret. I'm not sure this helps. Which I feel pretty certain is seminary professor for, this paper is garbage and you should feel bad for writing it. That was 10 years ago, and while I'm confident I've landed somewhere at least near a better interpretation this side of things, maybe it's worth starting a sermon like this off with Dr. Peach's own words. The Beatitudes are notoriously difficult to interpret. They're culturally subversive and feel a tad out of touch with reality at best, if not full-on offensive at worst. So what do we do? How do we contextually make sense of this series of phrases that Jesus uses to launch his most famous sermon? And I guess to do that, the best way is just to push you into the ocean. So here you go. Bathe in the glory of the Greek. That sounds like a seminary professor. I don't need you to do much with this. I just want to point out a couple things that it helps to see physically in the Greek text. In English, there's not as much of a clear structure. I mean, we get the flow, blessed are those who, for they will, blessed are those who, for they will. But in the Greek, there's a much clearer dividing line, particularly among the first 4 verses and the bottom ones. And that comes with the terms that Jesus uses to start off with. So, makarioi patokoi. And he's going to say, makarioi toi praise. And you'll notice they all start with that same Greek letter, what you might in math call pi, but it's the p sound in Greek. And I use all that to just point out that Jesus is being really, really intentional here in his artistry of the Sermon on the Mount. And then there's this clear division where the first 4 are separated out from the bottom 4. So here's how we're going to break this down. For this week, we're going to work through the first 4, and then next week, we're going to go right back in with the exact same teaching text, but we're going to tie it all together with the bottom 4. So to open up, what does that word beatitude even mean? Because in a lot of ways to me, it feels like that phrase we still use that's like dial the phone. No one's dialed a phone in years. One day I'll tell my son, well, you'll dial the phone. And I'm like, Dad, what does dial mean? We use the same title, but over time things have changed a little bit, or language or functionality. So beatitude is just the Latin translation of the Greek for these words blessed, beati. Of course, blessed, even in English, is about as helpful as the term beatitude, because while our English uses the term blessed, the Greek actually has a couple of different Greek words that can be translated blessed. So the one you generally are going to think of when you're thinking the religious concept of blessing is the Greek word eulogeo. Eulogeo is the word for good word, and it's where we get our word eulogy from. But in a spiritual context, eulogeo is what happens when God speaks a divine good word over a human. They are divinely blessed. So in the story where Mary has been impregnated with Jesus, and then she encounters her cousin Elizabeth, and Elizabeth breaks out and gives the classic line, "Blessed are you among women." It's the word eulogeo. God has spoken a good word over you, Mary, and your life is different because of it. But that is notably not the word Matthew uses, or Luke in his case, in Luke chapter 6, when giving the Beatitudes. Here, the Greek is makarioi, or in its original declension, makarios. And makarios is far less religious in its context and far more circumstantial in what it means. So some observation, it's this declaration of this is what the good life looks like. This is who's living the good life. So some modern translations have moved away from the traditional blessed and moved towards a route that would say happy is the one too. Anybody got an NLT? Anybody's translation say happy? No one in the first service had one anyways, but I thought I would at least throw it out there. The NLT chooses happy is the one, but even that still doesn't totally convey, because it's not about happiness as much as it's about defining who lives it right. The core idea is something along the lines of, man, fortunate is the one who, or well off, or they who. At its core, makarios is this word you use when you look at someone else's life out there and declare, that person, whew, they're living the good life. It's the Jaguar pulling up to you at the red light, and you're going, makarios, look at the life you're living, man. In context, it almost can work as like a salutation to some extent, this generality of like congratulations you extend towards somebody else. When someone is promoted or they graduate, makarios, you're living the good life. Or they have a baby or they get married, makarios, congratulations. This is what life's all about. And that's not new to Jesus. Jesus is picking up on an already very common Hebrew wisdom literature trope. Someone reflecting on the state of the world around them and then defining, based off of their observations, who is living the good life versus who's not. So Psalm 1 starts this way. How happy or blessed is the one who does not walk in the advice of the wicked or stand in the pathway of sinners or sit in the company of mockers. Instead, his delight is in the Lord's instruction, and he meditates on it day and night. According to Psalm 1, who lives the good life? It's not really a prescriptive text. I mean, we can imply prescription out of it. Here are the things you should do. But the text left on its own is merely observational. The good life belongs to the one that doesn't hang out with the corrupt and the wicked and the sinful people. The good life, that belongs to the person who instead spends his or her time meditating on God's word. And what Psalms does and Proverbs does over and over again, later Hebrew text would do. So the wisdom of Ben Sirah is a famous Hebrew text that came after the Hebrew Old Testament was canonized. So this was something that was written in the Second Temple period, meaning it's something that Jewish people would have had familiarity with, but it wasn't recognized as Holy Spirit-inspired scripture. But still something that circulated well around the time and something people were somewhat familiar with. And here's what the son of Sirah, or Ben Sirah, wrote. There are 9 who come to mind as blessed, a 10th who my tongue will proclaim. The man who finds joy in his children, which does make sense. I could get behind that one. Then he kind of loses me a little bit. And the one who lives to see the downfall of his enemies. I get it, but a little more cringy there, Sirah. Happy is the man who lives with a sensible woman. Okay, be careful, I get it, but yes. And the one who does not plow with an ox and a donkey combined. I mean, no one wants that type of life. Happy is the one, or blessed is the one who's not sinned with his tongue or does not serve an inferior. Happy is the one who finds a friend who speaks to attentive ears. How great is the one who finds wisdom, but none are greater than the one who fears the Lord. You kind of caught it at the end there, Sirah, so we'll let it pass. But do you see what he's doing? This isn't a prescription. He's not saying, here are the things you should be doing to live a blessed life. He's making an observational claim. When I look out at the world, who would I define as blessed? And notably, he defines a man as living the good life. And not only that, but a man who outworks and outpaces his enemies and doesn't have to serve inferior people. Someone that's important and influential enough to listen when he speaks up in a room. And if that's what Jesus is playing with all contextual things suggest that Jesus is playing on this familiar trope, that makes Jesus' words all the more awkward here. Because the cadence of the word makarios, it does not in any way match the announcements that Jesus follows the word with. And that's exactly what these are. They're announcements. It's easy sometimes to try to read these as a virtue list to aspire towards, and that works well for the bottom 4 when we're talking about being merciful and pure in heart. But the first 4, I mean, if you've experienced those types of life, you know that often does not feel virtuous. It doesn't feel good. And that means this is not advice or commands or some list of virtues. Jesus is not instructing you on how you should become blessed. He's announcing who's already blessed. So, New Testament scholar N.T. Wright, the Beatitudes are not advice about how to behave. They're announcements about what God is doing. Or the Christian philosopher Dallas Willard, the Beatitudes are not teaching on how to be blessed. They are pronouncements that certain people are blessed. Another New Testament scholar, Scott McKnight, the Beatitudes are not moral imperatives. They're the declaration of who is flourishing under God's reign. But therein lies the irony. Because Jesus is using celebratory language to discuss not so celebrated circumstances. Hey, you poor in spirit, congratulations. Are you grieving? You found the good life. Hey, those of you who are uninfluential and unimportant, makarios. I mean, that's questionable, if not full-fledged scandalous. But we have to remember the context of who Jesus is talking to. So remember, when Matthew's writing, he does not write with chapters and verse numbers. Those are super beneficial when I'm trying to get you to a certain place so we can start there together. But Matthew just writes start to finish, and that means it's worth going back to chapter 4 and watch the flow into chapter 5. Chapter 4 ends like this in verse 24. And the news about Jesus spread throughout Syria. And notice the people that come to Jesus. So they brought him all those who were afflicted and those who were suffering from various diseases and intense pains, the demon-possessed and the epileptics and the paralytics. And it does note that Jesus healed them, but Matthew moves on and says he heals them, and large crowds followed him from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and beyond the Jordan. And then he says, and when he saw the crowds, Matthew is not distinguishing some different crowd from chapter 4 to chapter 5. It is a direct flow. The crowds that sat on the hillside and listened to Jesus are the crowds who came to him in chapter 4. That's Matthew's implied statement. And if that's true, it's worth noting the stage in which all of this is given. You're talking about a world that's led with clear, distinctive power categories. And those powers up there, they would never even entertain the idea of stooping down below themselves. So if you were one of those suffering and afflicted from various diseases and intense pain, if you were the demon-possessed or epileptic or paralytics, what was your way to get up there? I mean, you could try to work your way to the top, but if your body doesn't work enough to get the job done, well, there was no government assistance and there was no hope for a better tomorrow. Your life became this feral instinct of trying to just stay alive. And then this man shows up and he's announcing a kingdom and he swims right past all the leaders and important people of the day. I mean, Jesus quite literally starts gathering up the powerless and the grieving and the unimportant. And he welcomes them as the first in line to his kingdom that never ends. Jesus launches his ministry by bypassing all the elite and accomplished and influential to pick out the nobody, barely hanging on, the overlooked and the impressive, that he can grab them by the shoulders, look them in the eyes and say, my kingdom's for you. You think this world has nothing to offer and you've got the short end of the stick, but I tell you who I've come for. You're the person I want here. So blessed are the poor in spirit. Makarios to you poor in spirit. To all of you spiritual zeros that you feel like you've got nothing to leverage. Those of you who feel that you have nothing to offer, no money, no status, no wisdom. And if you even did speak, you're not sure anyone would bother to listen. No one asks your opinion. No one lights up when you walk into the room. By all accounts, you would slow down a system far more than bolster it. To those who never get asked their opinion, because there's a world that's ran on power and position and they have neither, Jesus walks up and says, you are so blessed because you're exactly who this kingdom's come for. And blessed are those who mourn. Congratulations for those of you that feel like you're trapped in some cycle of grief. Those of you that feel this deep sadness has marred your life far beyond a bad day or a rough season. Those of you whose story recounts loss after loss after loss. Those of you who come from broken backgrounds that didn't experience the love of a mother or a father, of a parent figure. Those who feel like they're stuck in failure, whose dreams never panned out, and you can't think of anything to fix it at this point. Oh, you're so blessed. Because comfort is barreling towards you in a way you can't imagine. This kingdom is going to wipe away every tear, redeem every hurt, and make every pain right. The kingdom is coming. And blessed are the humble. Oh, how fortunate are you who feel like you are unimportant. For those of you that feel like you're not cool enough to drum up a following or forever glued to the background, overlooked by everyone who walks past you. For those of you who feel totally powerless to change the things that you wish so badly could change. For those of you that feel stepped on and taken advantage of and cast out, the ones with no title, no platform, no authority to make anything happen. You feel like you have no power, much less no investment. A day's coming when you're going to own it all. Because the king that owns it all is going to give you his inheritance. A day is coming. And for those of you who hunger and thirst for righteousness, you are living the good life, my friend. I know you see the brokenness of the world. You feel the weight of injustice and the tragedy of sin that keeps leaking into it. And you see it everywhere you go, on the way to work and in the news headlines and the prayers that naturally flow off your lips. I know you feel like there's nothing you can do to appease all the tragedies that surround you. But congratulations. Because the thing you desperately long for, the desire that's so real within you, you can taste it. A day is coming where you will be made full. Fully satisfied when justice and goodness will reign supreme. Every wrong will be made right. Every fracture will be restored. Not in part, but entirely. Because that's what my kingdom's coming to do. Do you hear what Jesus is doing? This isn't 4 different people that he staccato kind of point out. This isn't some stepladder of inspiration to happiness. This is a perfectly placed arrow targeting the very people on the hillside listening to him. A people whose entire lives are defined by lack. They're Jews, a minority people oppressed by Rome. They're being taxed into oblivion. Rome is taking their land and that they've relied on to live. They're taking everything from them. And now they're driven to stand outside of temple gates and beg for bread scraps. And they can't do anything about it. They can't change Roman occupation. They can't change taxation laws, driving them into deeper and deeper poverty. And on top of all that, sin and evil and death just running rampant through the world. There's demon possession and theft and corruption. The priesthood themselves are getting rich off of money exchange booths in the temple. And Jesus looks right past all of that and goes straight up to the insignificant, crushed, powerless, helpless people and says, you're the ones that are blessed. You think everything else in this world is what gets you the good life, but I'm telling you, you found it because you're who my kingdom is pursuing. He announces that despite everything this world says about power dynamics and social structures, they're actually the ones defined by the good life. In a phrase, Jesus really believes that his kingdom belongs to the poor and powerless. Now here's the catch on all of that. If we're ever going to think about calling this good news, it must demand that Jesus is really king. Because poverty is only blessed if there's a new kind of provision and economy on its way. And grief is only fortunate if there is a comfort strong enough to swallow grief whole. And meekness is not celebratory if the power structures of this world get the final say. Hunger and thirsting for righteousness, that's only worth congratulating if it can actually be satiated. Because if Jesus isn't king, well, then he's just some lunatic making a bunch of promises he can't keep, or maybe worse, he's a con man manipulating the emotions of the most vulnerable around him. If Jesus isn't king, well, we're left to fend for ourselves. And despite all the things humans have done to try to develop and build systems and institutions to combat the atrocities of this world, the harsh reality that most of us don't want to admit is, generally speaking, the poor stay poor, and grief breeds more grief, and powerless gets stepped on and crushed, and the ones who ache for things to be set right, well, they generally die waiting. So either Jesus is telling the truth about reality, or he is completely out of touch with it. So which is it? Is he a lunatic or a con man? Or is he king? Because if Jesus really is telling the truth, if he really is the eternal king come to rescue his creation, then everything we've read, it's not naive, it's not wishful thinking. It is an actual promise from the king himself. A promise that shines through the inevitable dark turns of life. A promise that certifies a destination in spite of all the bumps that we find ourselves walking this side of eternity. A promise that reframes the things that we only see as trash from our current vantage point. This is an art exhibit put up by British sculptural artists Tim Noble and Susan Webster. And it does, in a lot of ways, look like what I would expect if I walked into like a modern art exhibit somewhere on Central. It feels like that to me, at least. But the whole idea is that they use trash, and they had multiple things of this, to line out on the floor that you would walk around, and then you would come to this button, and you would push the button, and a light would shine on the trash. And there, the actual artistry comes from the silhouette behind what you first perceived as trash. The point being, the thing that you first looked at and thought was only trash, something worth being discarded and done away with, that when light actually shines on it, from a certain angle, we actually find there's beauty and meaning and significance. Do you see my point of what Jesus is doing? He's coming to this people that the world has defined as trash, that can't provide for themselves or do things for themselves. They are in desperate need of help, and crowds are pouring out of cities to find this man in hopes that something can happen for them to find the good life. And Jesus looks at him and goes, "You're already living the good life. Just wait till my light shines on it. Because when you see what I see, there is beauty and intentionality and significance." So what does this mean for us? I mean, if this is really who Jesus is after in this world, and it's not that he doesn't want those. I mean, Jesus is absolutely willing to call Nicodemus and the rich man, and he is willing to let all of them follow, but he also knows that they're going to have to give up a lot more. So what does it mean if Jesus' first target is the poor and powerless all around him? Well, to parse through that, I want to do invitation just a little bit differently today. And I know I started out saying that I'm not big on formula and step-by-step instructions, but that's what I'm going to give you for the next few minutes, okay? So bear with me. Here in a little bit, I'm going to go and the first service I felt pretty confident. This time around I don't. I wasn't prepared for trying to sing after preaching 2 sermons, so bear with me on that. But I'm going to lead a little bit with some reflection and music this morning. But rather than inviting you to stand and sing with me, I want you to start by first just identifying someone that in your mind you would identify as lacking. And I don't mean that in some sort of like judgmental looking down your nose at that person. I don't mean that in this, I'm better than they are. But just generally speaking, someone in your life, your family, your friend group, that when you look at it, you would just go, they do live a life that is in lack. And it can be lacking financial status, or financials, lacking in status, lacking in influence. It can be lacking from drug addiction. It can be whatever that might define them in lacking so much in a way that if you were honest, you've always just kind of considered them so far from Jesus that any spark of expectation or hint of hope that he might encounter them, it feels like a lost cause. And once you have that person in mind, number 2, I want you to just spend a few minutes visualizing in your mind's eye, what would it look like for Jesus to encounter them? Given the things he just said, what might he approach them like? For Jesus to swim through all this world says is necessary for the good life, grab them by the shoulders and say, I want you in my kingdom. And then what would they look like? What might change in their life? When the light shines on it, what's the beautiful silhouette that comes out the other side? And then 3, I want you to just pray for that to happen. Just pray, God, make it so. Spirit, build encounters where they can find your kingdom intersect with their life. And once you're done, I just would invite you, you don't have to, but if you want to, you can stand up or stay seated, but just to pour out in worship to worship the God who calls us with no basis of our own merit or self-concocted significance, but only does it by his grace and his grace alone, because that is the gospel. I mean, the defining reality is that we can all find ourselves in these types of situations defined by our lack. And Jesus comes in and says, yeah, but it's never about what you had in the first place because nothing deserves this. I'm giving it to you. And maybe you think you're that person, so lacking that Jesus would probably never even want you. And you found yourself in here going, look, I get it, Pastor, but that's for people like you that stand up on stages and write sermons. I don't think Jesus wants someone like me. And I would just close all this out by saying this. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the humble, for they will inherit the earth. And blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled.
Thank you so much for joining us here online at Norte Baptist Church. We're so grateful you took the time. We want to just take a few moments and let you know what we're all about here. We sincerely believe that Jesus Christ, God in flesh, stepped into time, walked the lives that we walked, lived perfectly, and then gave that up for us. And for anyone and everyone that would put their faith in him, there is renewal, forgiveness, restoration, life as God intended. And that comes with the promise of eternal life, but it also comes with the promise of what God intends life to be like here. If that's something you want to know more about, please email me, philip@dnbc.org. That's Philip at Del Norte Baptist Church, dnbc.org. I would love to hear